Hello and welcome. You're watching Gravitas. I'm Molly Gambhir. Let's get started. Our cover story tonight is about a crisis that continues to worsen. Europe's energy wars have left the continent on the edge. Landmarks in the continent are going dark. Businesses and homes are bracing for what could be an extremely challenging winter season. The continent is in a fix. And now there is a new twist in the tale. Unexplained leaks in Russian gas supplies. Are Europe's gas supplies being sabotaged? Are these leaks mere coincidences? Germany and Denmark fear there is a conspiracy at play. What is Russia saying? How does this fresh crisis impact Europe? We decode this and more over the next few minutes. For Europe, it just keeps getting worse. Winter is approaching and the continent is desperately trying to avoid an energy crisis. It is stockpiling gas and rationing supplies. If it fails to build reserves right now, Europe would be staring at rolling blackouts, shuttered factories, and a deep recession. It is not an easy task. And now European leaders have a new problem to deal with. The shortages could begin sooner than Europe predicted. The pipelines that supply gas to Europe are leaking. The ones that bring gas from Russia to Europe, they are damaged. There are leaks at both the Nord Stream 1 and the Nord Stream 2. Doesn't that sound suspicious? Already Russia has cut gas supplies to the region and now suddenly the pipelines are leaking. Is this just a coincidence? That's exactly what leaders of two European countries are wondering as well. Germany and Denmark suspect this is an act of sabotage. Is that the truth? Is someone trying to sabotage Europe's gas supplies? On Gravitas tonight, we decode Europe's latest energy crisis. First, let's tell you about those leaks. Here is what's happening. Russia had built two pipelines to supply gas to Europe, the Nord Stream 1 and the Nord Stream 2. Both the supply lines are under the Baltic Sea. Last night, both pipelines developed mysterious leaks. Officials monitoring the pipelines saw a sudden drop in pressure. Sweden was the first one to report the leaks. It discovered two leaks on Nord Stream 1. Soon after that, more reports came out. Denmark discovered similar problems on the Nord Stream 2. This pipeline is not really in use. It was supposed to be operationalized, but the plans were shelved in February this year. It happened just days before Russia invaded Ukraine. Russian troops had amassed around Ukraine by then. Their offensive pretty much killed any plans to operationalize Nord Stream 2. So Europe's supply will not be impacted a lot if this pipeline is damaged. The bigger worry are the leaks at the Nord Stream 1. It is the main pipeline that supplies gas to Europe. Here are some quick facts. In 2021, Russia supplied nearly 40% of the EU's gas needs through the Nord Stream 1. Before the war, several major European economies depended on Russian gas supplies. Half of Germany's gas imports are Russian. France got a quarter of its supply from Russia. Italy got 46% of its gas from Russia. Since the war in Ukraine started, the Russian supply has not been steady. Moscow has cut Nord Stream's capacity to just 20%. It blamed the Western sanctions for this. Russia claimed important equipment to run the pipeline is being held up. Now the same pipeline is leaking. There is no clear explanation yet. No one can say for sure what is happening. But some claims have emerged. Swedish seismologists have come up with an assessment. They say that they detected some explosions near the Nord Stream pipelines. Apparently, they happened in the same area as the gas leaks. Germany is investigating this as an act of sabotage. The evidence points to a violent act rather than a technical issue. That is what a German security official told an American news outlet. Denmark's Prime Minister has doubts as well, saying it is hard to imagine these are coincidences. We cannot rule out sabotage. Poland also is raising concerns. Consider these comments from the Polish Prime Minister. We don't know all the details, but we see clearly that it is an act of sabotage related to the next step of escalation in Ukraine. So key European leaders are crying foul. They are obviously hinting at a potential Russian hand. In the past, the European Union has accused Russia of blackmailing the region. Moscow, of course, has hit back at Europe. But this time, the Kremlin is singing the same tune. Russia also fears the Nord Stream could have been sabotaged.
This is a very alarming news. Indeed, we are talking about some destruction in the pipe, but it's not yet clear what kind of pressure has really dropped in the Danish economic zone. This is a completely unprecedented situation that requires an urgent investigation. We are extremely worried with this news.
So Russia wants an investigation. Will it work with Europe to find out what really happened? Or is Moscow just posturing? The US says it is ready to support Europe, but it seems like the European Union has been taken aback. Today, Brussels refrained from blaming anyone.
At this stage, it's very premature to speculate on what the causes are. As I said, we've been informed about the situation by the member states concerned, and the member states are looking into this issue. We will remain in close contact with them, but it's really not the moment to speculate on what the potential causes could be.
But those statements failed to reassure the markets. Gas prices spiked in Europe today. This is a sensitive situation. As of today, there are no signs of any serious disruption to Europe's gas supplies. But even just the fear of a disruption is causing the markets to react sharply. The biggest casualty of this situation could be Germany. Experts say the German economy is already sending recession signals. Businesses are worried about future prospects. They say high energy costs are putting pressure on the profit margins. Even German citizens are concerned. They are worried if they will be able to make ends meet. Tonight, we have a case study for you. Monique Ruck is a single mother. She lives in Berlin, and she is struggling to make ends meet. The high cost of living has forced her to take her children to a food bank.
I've given up things for my children since forever, but now I'm giving up even more. I only finish what the children haven't eaten. I probably spend 200 euros a week on shopping. I have 3 children and I already buy things on sale. If there's a toast on sale, I buy 5 packs and freeze them so that I can somehow make ends meet.
The state of affairs is dire. The situation could get out of hand if Europe fails to contain its cost of living crisis. The days ahead could get ugly because the ultimate threat now seems plausible. A complete cut-off of Russian energy supplies to Europe. Moscow has decided to intensify its war in Ukraine. Everything is fair game right now. Russian President Vladimir Putin is challenging the West on every front. And this brings me to our next story. Edward Snowden is now a Russian citizen. the high-profile whistleblower who revealed how US agencies were conducting large-scale surveillance abroad and on its own citizens, the same Edward Snowden has now been given a Russian passport. The United States has kicked off speculation now. The US State Department fears Moscow could draft Snowden to fight the war in Ukraine. Are these fears genuine? Our next report has the answers.
Is Edward Snowden a whistleblower or a traitor? The answer depends on who you ask. 9 years after he exposed America's invasive surveillance programs, Snowden's deeds are still a subject of debate in Washington. Moscow's moves have now added a new layer of complexity to this story.
Let's cut straight across now to US Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking.
Deep, extended conversations that have taken place, in fact, over many years, because we were counterparts when I was last at the State Department as Deputy Secretary. I think it reflects the fact that the partnership between our countries, between India and the United States, is simply one of the most consequential in the world. It's vital to addressing virtually every global challenge that our people face, whether it's health security, climate change, food security, upholding a free and open international order, to name just a few. Over the past years, we have made real progress in elevating that partnership, bilaterally, that is directly between us, through institutions like the Quad and the G20, and in international organizations, including at the United Nations. Today we talked about how we can further advance our shared security, economic and geopolitical goals. Last week in New York, we were both witness to genuine unity among the vast majority of UN member states, developing and developed, big and small, north and south, on the need to work together to address these shared challenges that all of our people face, as well as to uphold the United Nations Charter and its core principles, including sovereignty, territorial integrity, and human rights. We're grateful for the Minister's partnership and leadership on these fronts. That includes in the Security Council, where, as we were together, he underscored the message that Prime Minister Modi delivered recently in Uzbekistan that, and I quote, "Today's era is not of war." And then in the General Assembly, where the Prime Minister said of India, and I quote, "We are on the side that respects the UN Charter and its founding principles," end quote. So is the United States. We recognize that to meet the challenges we face, members of the UN must not only uphold the Charter, but also modernize the institution, including by making the Security Council more inclusive. That's why in his address to the General Assembly, President Biden expressed his support for increasing the number of both permanent and non-permanent representatives of the Security Council, a long-standing goal of India. This includes permanent seats for those nations we've long supported and permanent seats for countries in Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean. In his own General Assembly address, the Minister also highlighted the food, fuel, and fertilizer crises that have hit countries as they struggle to rebuild from the COVID pandemic. And indeed, if you look at how we spent most of our week last week at the United Nations, it was focusing on these very challenges. We've been working to rally allies and partners, not only to help people around the world most affected by these crises, but also to make sure that we are part of the solution to creating durable ways of dealing with these challenges. For example, on food security, not only responding to the emergency need, but also helping countries develop durable agricultural productive capacity. We know as well that each of these crises has been exacerbated by Russia's war in Ukraine, and it's why we continue to marshal international pressure on President Putin to end his war of choice. We also held a Quad ministerial on the margins of the UN, with the Minister and I continuing to work with our Australian and Japanese counterparts to realize what is a shared vision of a free, open Indo-Pacific that's connected, that's prosperous, that's secure, and that is resilient. And here, it's worth emphasizing that we're bringing complementary strengths to bear on problems that none of us can address effectively alone. A few examples: cybercrime. You saw in the joint statement that we issued in New York last week our agreement to deny safe haven to ransomware operations emanating from within our respective countries, because a foothold anywhere can be used to stage attacks everywhere, and to assist one another in the face of cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. One of the clearest ways that Quad partners can continue to deliver for people across the region is by being there in times of their greatest need. In New York, we also took a step that will increase our capacity to do that. We signed a set of guidelines to deepen our coordination among the 4 countries on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. In today's meeting, and as well at dinner last night, we also talked about ways to further strengthen our strategic partnership and advance shared objectives. This includes helping one another prevent a climate catastrophe and adapt to the changes to come, because the future of our people and people everywhere depends in no small part on hitting the ambitious targets that we both set. That includes India's goal of installing 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel capacity by 2030, which would mean more than 60% of India's electricity comes from non-polluting energy sources. We're helping to do that through the U.S.-India Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 Partnership, which is helping to foster joint research and development, mobilizing finance from the private sector and multilateral institutions, and finding ways to scale up innovative clean energy technologies. As the world's 2 biggest democracies, we're also committed to an enduring project, as our founders put it, of striving to form a more perfect union. This is a project for both of us. We have to work together to show that our democracies can meet our people's needs, and we must continue to hold ourselves, both of us, as well as our fellow democracies, to our core values, including respect for universal human rights, like freedom of religion and belief and freedom of expression, which makes our democracies stronger. We explored ways to keep building our dynamic economic partnership. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which we launched in May, is one way we'll do this. Just a few weeks ago, India affirmed its intention to participate in 3 of the framework's pillars on supply chains, clean economy, and fair economy. The U.S. is India's largest trading partner, with $157 billion last year in bilateral trade. We're India's largest source of foreign direct investment, with a diverse range of U.S. companies investing $45 billion in India: Google, Microsoft, Whirlpool, Boeing, GE, and I could go on. But we see more room to grow, and to do it in a way that creates jobs for workers in both of our countries. The U.S.-India Commercial Dialogue, the U.S.-India CEO Forum will give us more opportunities to do that in the months ahead. So these are just some of the ways, multilaterally, regionally, bilaterally, that we're bringing this close relationship between India and the United States even closer together. And with India holding the presidency of the Security Council in December and taking over the presidency of the G20 next year, we'll be able to drive more concerted global cooperation and action together. At an event this weekend, you called, Mr. Minister, the shift in U.S.-India relations the single biggest change that you've observed in decades of service as a diplomat. The minister said, and I quote, "It did not change only because of government policies. The relationship changed because of Indian Americans." And I could not agree more. We're grateful to have an Indian American community that does so much to deepen ties between our countries, as well as to shape the fabric of this country. And I'd add that we're also grateful to communities in India, including of American origin, that are doing their part to strengthen the relationship for the good of both of our countries and both of our peoples. With that, Jack, over to you.
Thank you. It is really a great pleasure to join Secretary Blinken at this media event at the conclusion of what I can honestly say is a very productive morning of discussions. I was last here in April, and obviously a lot of things in the world have changed since then. While we have spent quite some time this morning, I thank the Secretary and his wife for hosting us yesterday at a working dinner. This was really a very gracious gesture, and I think an occasion that both of us put to good use. Obviously, a large part of our deliberations today were devoted to the strengthening of our bilateral relationship. Most of you would readily understand that it has grown very significantly in scope and depth over the last few years. We engage each other across pretty much every domain, and the quality of our cooperation, as indeed of our conversations, have steadily improved. In today's meeting, we discussed our political coordination, working together in plurilateral and multilateral formats, and exchanging assessments and collaborating on important regional issues and global challenges. I would specifically mention the Ukraine conflict and the Indo-Pacific situation in that regard. I shared with Secretary Blinken my experience of interactions during the UN General Assembly about the deep anxieties in the global south on fuel, on food, on fertilizers. The increasing salience of green growth, digital development, and affordable health is today very, very evident. We must not let current developments jeopardize Agenda 2030 on SDGs or to deflect us from climate action and climate justice commitments. Our cooperation in different bilateral domains is progressing vigorously. Naturally, Secretary Blinken and I did a comprehensive stock-taking, but separately I met Defense Secretary Austin and Commerce Secretary Raimondo to review their particular areas. I participated in a particularly interesting roundtable organized by the National Science Foundation. I will be meeting business leaders over the next 2 days, and given the bipartisan support that we have long enjoyed in the US Congress, I look forward to interacting with some of its prominent members. There will also be an occasion for me to engage think tanks and policy analysts so that there is a better understanding of India's concerns and interests. Having said that, there are particular issues in the current global context that shape the evolution of our cooperation and therefore merit your attention as well. Prominent among them is our commitment to address the global volatility which has arisen from the COVID, from conflicts, and from climate events. India and the US have a strong interest in encouraging more resilient and reliable supply chains. This requires policy decisions as well as practical measures involving the business community. We are focused on those goals. Furthermore, the digital world mandates a greater emphasis on trust and transparency. This too has been the subject of detailed conversations and follow-up action. When it comes to critical and emerging technologies, we both see the value of expanding trusted research. Our national security, our economic security, our technology security are all enhanced by closer collaboration. It is also in our mutual interest to facilitate the development and mobility of talent. We agreed that impediments in this regard should be addressed. There is a keen interest in India's national education policy, and we will explore how that can best serve to expand our partnership. On mobility, specifically visas, this is particularly crucial given its centrality to education, business, technology, and family reunions. There have been some challenges of late, and I flag it to Secretary Blinken and his team, and I have every confidence that they will look at some of these problems seriously and positively. All these issues and more were evaluated not just in our bilateral context, but also from the perspective of the Quad and the I2U2. We are keen to move forward on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. I saw some creative thinking on how to repurpose established mechanisms for more contemporary collaboration. Our two countries are committed to contributing to the betterment of the global commons. True to our traditions, we rise above narrow national interest to serve the needs of the larger international community. We do so on the basis of our belief in a rules-based order, in our respect for international law, and in our adherence to the UN Charter. India-US cooperation is today visible across the length and breadth of the Indo-Pacific, and perhaps even beyond. It has many facets and expresses itself in different ways. We particularly value closer coordination in the Indian subcontinent, where we perceive that our convergences are very strong. It is essential that democracy, pluralism, progress, development, and prosperity are nurtured. Conversely, we must counter radicalization, extremism, and fundamentalism. India is widening its international footprint, and there are many more regions where we will be intersecting with American interests. It is to our mutual benefit that this be a complementary process. Coming out of the UNGA, the UNGA, the reform of the UN is a particularly topical subject. We appreciate the positive approach of the US to this issue, reflected in the position articulated by President Biden himself. We look forward to working with the US to take this further. I also expressed appreciation at the strong cooperation that we have got from the US on the question of tackling international terrorism. In particular, I refer to the listing of well-known and wanted terrorists by the UN sanction process. In many other formats too, our two countries collaborate to keep the world safer and more secure. We spoke over the last 2 days of our commitment to practicing and furthering democracy, human rights, and good governance. Each country approaches this set of issues from their history, tradition, and societal context. Our yardstick for judgment are the integrity of the democratic processes, the respect and credibility that they command with the people, and the non-discriminatory delivery of public goods and services. India does not believe that the efficacy or indeed the quality of democracy should be decided by vote banks. This is an area where we look forward to a healthy exchange of views. There will be convergences and best practices that we can both profit by and perhaps even share with third countries. India will be taking over the presidency of the G20 at the end of this year. I appreciate the expression of support by Secretary Blinken towards making our chairship successful. Once again, I thank the Secretary for his warm welcome, for the open and comfortable conversations we have had, and for his commitment to further what we both believe is the critical relationship of our era. Thank you.
We'll now turn to questions. We'll start with Ian Marlowe of Bloomberg.
Thank you. Secretary Blinken, we've seen several reported leaks in the Nord Stream pipeline system that Germany has said could be an act of sabotage. What's the U.S. assessment of what we're seeing there, particularly given previous Russian moves to curtail gas supplies? And can you speak a little bit more broadly to the pressure that Europe is coming under as winter and a potential energy crisis looms? External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, thanks for taking our questions. First, I'm wondering if you could offer India's perspective on U.S. efforts to implement a global price cap on Russian energy. Would India consider joining that kind of price cap mechanism, and do you see it as potentially a way for India as well as other countries in the global south to get more leverage and negotiate even cheaper prices for fuel? And just a second question, if I may, can you talk a little bit about India's plans going forward for military hardware and equipment, given the sanctions that the US and others are putting on Russian industry and given India's historic reliance on Russian technology? How is India trying to head off challenges related to Russia being potentially unable to service that equipment going forward as a result of sanctions? Can Russia still fulfill all of India's requirements? And will India look at perhaps more purchases of, say, American or Israeli military equipment? Thank you.
Ian, thanks very much. On the question on energy security and Nord Stream in particular, a few things. The leaks are under investigation. There are initial reports indicating that this may be the result of an attack or some kind of sabotage, but these are initial reports and we haven't confirmed that yet. But if it is confirmed, that's clearly in no one's interest. Now, my understanding is the leaks will not have a significant impact on Europe's energy resilience. And what's critical is that we are working day in, day out, both on a short-term basis and a long-term basis, to address energy security for Europe and for that matter, around the world. Short-term, just to cite a few examples, we are working on implementing the oil price cap to keep Russian oil flowing, but at a steep discount. That, of course, will deny Russia excess revenues that it would use to prosecute its aggression against Ukraine. and at the same time, as I said, keep oil flowing on world markets. We're working to continue to surge LNG supplies to Europe in cooperation with global partners, including in the Indo-Pacific. It's worth noting that our own oil production is up by more than 500,000 barrels per day this year. Our LNG exports are up more than 20% since last year. In fact, we became the largest LNG supplier to the European Union and the UK this year. And we've become the largest overall LNG exporter this year. And of course, as you know, we've been tapping into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at unprecedented levels. Others are doing the same. This is having an impact both on supply and on price. Long term, we're supporting efforts to reduce reliance on fossil fuels, including LNG over the long term, including through a task force that we established with the European Union some months ago on energy security that's working very actively, looking at ways both to reduce demand, to pursue renewables, to make the transition. And then we're working with global partners to reduce dependence on fossil fuels and accelerate the transition to renewables beyond Europe. It's a long way of saying that there are clear challenges in the months ahead that we're addressing, but there is also a very significant opportunity to do two things. One, to finally end the dependence of Europe on Russian energy, and thus the position that Europe is in of being on the receiving end of the weaponization of energy by Russia, and also to accelerate the transition to renewables and to make sure that we're addressing the climate challenge that we face. So we can and we are working to do all of this in a way that provides energy security for Europeans and not only gets us through the next months, but leaves us in a better, stronger position for the years ahead.
On the price gap, we had a brief discussion on it this morning. More technical people are engaged between the two systems on this particular subject. It is, of course, a G7 initiative. Now, you have to understand that in the last few months, the energy markets are already under very great stress. Countries in the global south have found it difficult to compete for limited energy, not just in terms of pricing, escalating pricing, but often in terms of availability. There are tenders, countries have had tenders for which they don't even get a reply from suppliers. So our concern right now is that energy markets already under stress must soften up. We would judge any situation frankly by how it affects us and other countries of the global south, because as I communicated to the Secretary, there is a very, very deep concern among developing countries about how their energy security needs are addressed or not. On the military equipment, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think in recent months we have faced any particular problems in terms of servicing and spare parts supply of equipment that we have got in the past from Russia. Whether where we get our military equipment and platforms from, that's not an issue, honestly, which is a new issue or an issue which has particularly changed because of geopolitical tensions. I think we look at possibilities across the world. We look at the quality of technology, the quality of capability, the terms on which that particular equipment is offered, and we exercise a choice which we believe is in our national interest. Now, if you were to look at the last 15 years, for example, you can see that we have actually procured a lot from the United States. If you were to consider, for example, aircraft, the C-17, the C-130, the P-8, or the Apache helicopter, or the Chinooks, or the howitzers, the M777 howitzers. We have done so from France. I mean, we bought recently the Rafale aircraft. We have done so from Israel. So We have a tradition of multi-sourcing, and for us, how to get the optimal deal from a competitive situation is really what this is all about.
We're listening in to U.S. State Secretary Antony Blinken and the Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar holding that joint press conference following their meeting in Washington, D.C. and also taking some questions. Overall, reaffirming the commitment of both sides towards bolstering ties. The Indian Foreign Minister earlier also met the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, where they discussed new opportunities for bilateral defense industrial cooperation. We'll monitor those developments very closely, but shifting focus for now to Iran. For more than 10 days, the country has been gripped by anti-regime protests, arguably the biggest since 2009. Most of the protesters are women. They are opposing Iran's hijab mandate. The trigger for these demonstrations was a custodial death. 22-year-old Mahsa Amini died after being arrested by the morality police. Her identity became the reason for her death. First, her identity as a woman. And second, her identity as a Kurd. The Kurds are the third largest ethnic group in Iran. They make up 10% of the total population. Most of them live in the western part of Iran, near the border with Iraq. The regime in Iran treats them as second-class citizens. So Amini's death has galvanized the Kurdish population. Let me show you some pictures from Saturday. These are Kurdish protesters from the city of Erbil in Iraq. Most of them are Iranians living in exile. They were chanting slogans and holding up banners against the Iranian regime.
As Iranian Kurdish women, we are oppressed by the government of the gallows. They oppressed her 2 times, once because she's a Kurdish and second time because she's a woman. Over the last 4-5 days, there are killings all over Iran. They're killing us to oppress our voices.
Guess how the regime responded? With brute force. Iran's Revolutionary Guards have launched airstrikes on northern Iraq. The first strike was on Saturday. It was followed by another strike on Monday. That's 2 lethal attacks in 3 days. According to Iraqi officials, Iran bombarded their villages for 8 hours. What is their justification? Well, Iran says they are targeting Kurdish separatists. Now, there is some truth to these claims. Northern Iraq is home to several Iranian opposition groups. Some of them also operate paramilitary outfits. In the past, Iranian guards have struck inside this Kurdish territory. In 2018, they launched ballistic missiles at the offices of a Kurdish political party. 18 people were killed. In March this year, they hit the residence of a Kurdish businessman in Erbil. Several people were injured. Iran considers Kurdish groups as separatists and terrorists, and right now they feel these groups are stirring the anti-hijab protests, even sending weapons across the border. The demonstrations have been the strongest in northwestern Iran. This area is the stronghold of Iran's Kurdish population. But the question is, how accurate is this claim? Let's examine it. First, take a look at this map. See those cities marked over Iran? Those are the major protest sites in the country. And as you can see, they are not limited to the northwest. For example, Mashhad. It is a city in the northeast dominated by Persians. And then you have Shiraz. It is located in the south and again dominated by Persians. So the argument that these protests are orchestrated by Kurdish separatists is not valid. There is genuine anger among the people, particularly the women. These protests are predominantly driven by the women of Iran. Yes, the Kurdish identity is valid, but the major demand is linked to freedom of choice for women. And having said that, Amini's death has also exposed the fault lines in the country. Iran's constitution provides equal rights to all ethnicities. Their language, their culture, their cuisine, everything is protected by the constitution. But in practice, that's not the case. Iran's minorities are treated as second-class citizens, especially the Kurds, the Arabs, and the Balochis. And this has created resentment against the Iranian regime. Some members of these communities have taken up arms against the state. So Iran feels their retaliation is justified. In fact, this is classic Iranian strategy. Blame so-called outside forces for their own failures. Iran is accusing the United States of trying to hijack these protests, of violating Iran's sovereignty. They have also slammed the European Union for its criticism. Do you see the problem here? Iran is blaming everyone under the sun for this unrest. The Kurds, the US, the Europeans. But they are refusing to accept the root cause, their own regressive laws. And until they do that, the public anger will not subside. So far, the crackdown has claimed the lives of around 50 people. More than 1,200 have also been arrested. So the regime is in no mood to make concessions. Instead, it is using these protests to crack down further, especially on women and Kurds. For both these groups, the last few weeks have reaffirmed their position in Iranian society. It is one of suppression and neglect. Our next story is from Japan. This morning, it held a state funeral for Shinzo Abe, the country's longest-serving prime minister. It was a lavish ceremony with a host of world leaders in attendance, like US Vice President Kamala Harris, the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. They all paid their respects to Shinzo Abe. But the funeral was not without controversy. Right outside where it was held, hundreds of Japanese citizens marched on the streets, calling the ceremony unwarranted. Here's a report.
Fire cannons, floral tributes, moving speeches,
Japan is back,
and protests. This is how Japan bid farewell to Shinzo Abe, Japan's longest-serving prime minister. It was a lavish state funeral, the first of its kind in 55 years. It started at around 10:30 a.m. with a solemn prayer ceremony, which was followed by rituals like these. This is Aki Abe, the widow of Shinzo Abe. She carried his ashes through the auditorium and handed them over to the Japanese Prime Minister. Japanese lawmakers then took turns to honor Abe. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida called Abe a man of courage who deserved to live longer.
Mr. Abe, sir, you were a man who needed to live a lot longer. As the compass that shows Japan and the world's future, I had no doubts that you would have been working to your fullest in the next 10-20 years. You were in the Prime Minister's office for the longest period in the country's constitutional history, but history will remember you not for the length of the period, but for your achievements. Courage is doing what is right. Mr. Abe, you were a person of courage.
Also present at this ceremony were a host of foreign dignitaries, like US Vice President Kamala Harris, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, former British Prime Minister Theresa May, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. As they paid their respects to the deceased leader, Japan's self-defense forces honored Abe with a 19-gun salute, a tribute befitting the stature of Shinzo Abe. But a few miles away, the sound of cannons was overshadowed by these chants. These were Japan's own citizens, protesting against the state funeral. Why? Everyone had their own reasons. Some felt Abe didn't deserve such an honor.
The things Abe did as a Prime Minister of Japan, a democratic country, is not worth praising. There is no evidence to prove that it's worth such an event.
Others were miffed over the enormous expenditure.
The problem is that they used our tax money for this. It would not have been a problem if the cost was covered by the LDP or the cabinet. That's just what I feel.
The protests went on till the funeral ended. The protesters marched on the streets, armed with slogans, drums and banners, as the cops struggled to rein them in. These protests offered a glimpse of the legacy Abe left behind. He may have been a celebrated world leader, but at home he was a polarizing figure. His tenure was marked by allegations of cronyism, and even in death, his association with a cult organization has left the people of Japan divided. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Let's now talk about chess. The game finds itself at the center of a raging controversy, thanks to a cheating saga. You may remember this story from last week. World chess champion Magnus Carlsen resigned from an online match after making just one move. His opponent was American teenager Niemann. Now, there is a bit of history here. Earlier this month, Niemann beat Carlsen at the Sinkfield Cup. It ended the champion's 53-game unbeaten run in classical chess. Soon after, Carlsen quit the tournament. His cryptic tweet hinted there was something more to his move. And then last week, the duo met again, this time virtually. This time, Carlsen resigned after his first move. The International Chess Federation criticized him for tanking the match. Clearly, it was about making a statement. And now we know exactly what that statement is. This is what the undisputed king of the sport posted on social media. I believe Niemann has cheated more and more recently than he has publicly admitted. His over-the-board progress has been unusual, and throughout our game in the Sinkfield Cup, I had the impression that he wasn't tense or even fully concentrating on the game in critical positions. Coming from the world champion, that's serious. But still, a couple of questions remain. Number one, has Magnus Carlsen provided any proof for these allegations? He hasn't. At this point, this is nothing more than conjecture. Question number two, does Niemann have a record of cheating? He does. He has admitted to cheating twice in online chess. Once when he was 12 years old, and then again when he was 16 years old. But now he claims to be a changed man. Niemann says he is willing to play naked to prove that he is not cheating. So which side do we believe? Could this be a case of Magnus Carlsen being a sore loser? And to answer that, let's look at his past record. Carlsen is usually appreciative of his opponents. Let me show you one such instance. Earlier this month, he was playing Indian Grandmaster Ramesh Babu Pragnananda. He is just 17 years old. Many have touted him as a future world champion. Their match ended in a draw. But take a look at how Carlsen responded to it, with a round of applause and a thumbs up. Doesn't quite look like an insecure guy, does he? Carlsen is a 5-time world champion. His peak rating is the highest in chess history. He holds the longest unbeaten streak in elite chess. You don't reach that level without being secure about your skills. Carlsen has been a great ambassador for online chess. He understands its potential. At the same time, he also understands the pitfalls. Let me go back to his statement today. We must do something about cheating, and for my part going forward, I don't want to play with people who have cheated repeatedly in the past because I don't know what they are capable of doing in the future. Now, does this mean Carlsen will never play Niemann again? Certainly looks like that. But before shutting the door on Niemann, we must have proof. The circumstances look shady, so does Niemann's track record. But when it comes to such big decisions, there must be due process. And having said that, Carlsen is right about one thing. We must do something about cheating. And just to be clear here, this is not new in the world of chess. Cheating is as old as the game itself. Sometimes the allegations are wildly imaginative. Let me tell you a story from 1978. World champion Anatoly Karpov was playing Viktor Korchnoi. The challenger accused the champion of cheating. Guess how? With blueberry yogurt. That's right. Karpov's team sent him a serving of blueberry yogurt. This was interpreted as a signal to their player. Remember, that was in 1978. Nowadays, cheating is computerized. You can use chess engines, miniature devices, data clouds, all of which can be smuggled in. Most major tournaments scan their players to prevent this from happening. But in online chess, it's a whole different matter. Imagine you use a chess engine to analyze an ongoing game. How would the organizers even find out, especially if you do it on a different device? Unless this issue is solved, online chess faces an existential crisis. Because let's face it, if chess engines are involved, it becomes a no contest. Modern day computers are way better than any grandmaster. It's like running a sprint with a Formula 1 car. The machine will always be better. So is there a solution here is the question. Many experts talk about analyzing moves to determine whether a human made them or a computer did. You see, the machine is not just better than us, it's also different. The strategies, the style of play, the level of anticipation, all of it is different from a human being. So technically, you can differentiate a chess engine from a human being. In fact, that is what led to this whole controversy. Magnus Carlsen is considered invincible in the longer format of chess. Yet, Niemann beat him in that same format. That too, pretty convincingly. The manner of that victory led to speculation about cheating. Does that automatically make Niemann a cheater? In the world of chess, Magnus Carlsen's word is worth a lot. But without proof, nobody can offer judgment. On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas, leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. 8,
Yeah.
7,
Oh,
6,
wow.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
From our studios live in New York City,